Now that we've talked about the darkening blending modes and the lightening blending modes and how they have opposites such as darken and lighten color and lighten color, screen and multiply, it's time to talk about the contrast modes, which are a little bit different. The contrast modes knock out 50% gray, so we've seen that happen when we've created 50% gray fills, the 128 gray. Whereas the darken modes would knock out white and the lighten modes would knock out black, as you can see happening immediately on any of these modes in here on the text. Overlay will only knock out the grays. And the same is true for any of the contrast modes. It will affect blacks and whites, but knock out grays. Now, there's a little more to this. The contrast modes have a different effect depending on if they're being applied to something lighter than 50% gray or something darker than 50% gray. So let me demonstrate that. Here's the formula for overlay, and notice that it's two formulas. Anything that's lighter than 50% gray, the brighter colors, the whites, all of those, will be affected by this formula, and everything darker than 50% gray will be affected by the bottom formula here. Now, you might notice something if you look back at the previous videos. The two formulas here look a little familiar. For example, multiply is A times B. And notice that if I had the brush up instead of the move tool, come here brush, notice that we have the multiply formula right here. The formula for screen is A plus B minus A times B. And you'll notice that we have that right in here. So there's a little more going on. We've got this 2 times on both of them. And then in the case of the lightning, you're also subtracting 1. But in a lot of ways, it's similar to having both the multiply and the screen effect applied. Now, that said, the overlay mode will favor the background layer over the active layer or the composite background layer. So let me show you what I'm talking about. I was shown this demonstration years and years and years ago, and it stuck with me, so I thought I'd show it to you as well. If we turn on these two gradients, we can see that we've got a black to white gradient in both cases. Now, this will cover everything from pure black to pure white. So if we were to go in and set one of these to multiply, we would have a darkening effect on the left all the way to black. And then by the time it gets to white, it will knock it out and have no effect. If we go to our next blending mode here, our next gradient here, and we go ahead and set this to screen, we will have the blacks being knocked out, and then we'll get lighter and lighter and lighter till we get to white, which will be shown and fully affected. Now let's turn these off. If we were to go to overlay, if we were to apply an overlay mode to something that goes from black to white, it will knock out the pure gray. It will make things lighter as it gets higher up and darker as it gets further down. I should say darker as it gets darker and lightening as it gets lighter. That's why these are contrast modes. Lights get lighter, darks get darker. But notice something else that's happening. We're not getting 100% white or 100% black. Even though the formulas are for lightening and darkening, or for screen and multiply, the two lightening and darkening effects that we go to first in any case, just to test and see if it works, they're not pure. They're being affected differently. You've got multiplication happening and subtraction, but it's also, like I said, favoring the background. So in our case, we have this light contrast. Now, that said, since we have lights and darks affected, lights getting lighter and darks getting darker, let's go ahead and just make a dummy layer here, a brightness contrast, make sure it's set to 0, and we'll just set this to overlay. And yeah, sure enough, there's more contrast there. Before, after. Before, after. Now, this is very useful for adding contrast, and you've seen me do it a number of times, but it's also wonderful in many other cases because it blends things so beautifully. Let's take a look at even here. If we go to overlay, we could just see this lovely effect occurring. Now, overlay, unlike multiply and screen, is not affected differently by fill as or by opacity. So either one of them will have the same effect. That said, it won't clip. So you'll be, in fact, most of the contrast modes aren't going to clip. So you're usually in the clear. There are a couple that will, such as vivid light, linear light, pin light, and hard mix, which are in here. But the soft light, the overlay, and the hard light won't clip at all, so you'll be in the clear for it. I really like overlay. It's a go-to for contrast for me. I say start here before you go any further. Again, it is very similar to multiply and screen, but it's not quite the same. Okay, that's overlay. I'll see you in the next video as we go ahead and discuss our lightning effects for soft light and hard light.